There is a moment that happens inside the brain of someone who always keeps people at arm's length. A moment most people never get to see. And it does not happen when you cry. It does not happen when you beg. It does not happen when you send the message you spent 3 hours writing at 2 in the morning. It happens in total silence. When your name stops showing up. When your energy leaves the room. When the person who always came back simply does not come back anymore. And what fires inside their nervous system in that moment is something neuroscientists have studied, attachment researchers have documented, and almost nobody in the relationship space has had the courage to explain plainly. I am going to explain it to you right now. Stay with me. Here is what most people get completely wrong about avoidant attachment. They think avoidants do not feel. They think avoidants do not want closeness. They think avoidants are fine when you leave because they were fine when they pulled away. Every single one of those assumptions is wrong. And the gap between what avoidants feel and what they show is precisely where this entire dynamic lives. That gap is what we are going into today. Because if you have ever loved someone who seemed to need space more than they needed you, if you have ever felt like the harder you tried, the further they drifted, if you have ever woken up one day and realized that something in you has quietly gone still, you are going to understand yourself and them in a way that most people spend their entire lives never reaching. And that understanding changes everything. Before we go further, I want you to think about the last time you stopped trying. Not because you gave up, but because something in your body said, enough. Hold that moment in your mind. We are going to come back to it. Let us start where everything starts, the nervous system. An avoidant person's relationship to closeness was not decided by them as an adult. It was wired into them as a child. Before they had language for it, before they had any framework for understanding what was happening. What they had was a consistent experience. And that experience taught their developing nervous system one of the most durable lessons a child can learn. That needing someone puts you in danger. Not physical danger necessarily, emotional danger. The danger of reaching and finding nothing there. The danger of showing your need and being met with absence, or inconsistency, or something worse than absence, which is presence that feels wrong. A parent who is physically there but emotionally unreachable. A caregiver who is warm one day and cold the next with no logic the child can follow. The child's nervous system does not have the capacity to say, my parent is struggling with something and this is not about me. The child's nervous system says needing things creates pain. And it builds a wall. Not around the heart in the way people talk about it in movies, around the nervous system itself. The body learns to suppress the activation signal of need before it even reaches conscious awareness. Neuroscientists call this deactivating strategy. The avoidant person genuinely feels less longing in the moment than other people do. Not because the longing is not there, because the circuitry that would let them feel it has been routed around. It goes underground. And it stays underground until something disrupts the system so fundamentally that the old wiring cannot hold anymore. Now here is where you come in. And here is where the story gets complicated in a way nobody fully prepares you for. If you were the person who fell into this dynamic, if you were the one who kept reaching, kept showing up, kept finding new ways to bridge the gap, chances are your nervous system is wired in almost the exact opposite direction. Where the avoidant learned to suppress need, you learned to amplify awareness. Where the avoidant built walls, you built antenna. You can read a room the way other people read a sentence. You know what someone is not saying before they know they are not saying it. You feel the emotional texture of a conversation long after it ends. You carry other people's feelings in your body without meaning to, and without being able to stop. This is not a personality quirk. This is a nervous system that was trained in a high-sensitivity environment, usually early, usually without your consent. You learned to attune to other people as a survival strategy, and you became extraordinary at it. The cost of that skill, and it does have a cost, is that it made you a very specific kind of dangerous to an avoidant person. Not dangerous in the way you might think. Dangerous in the way that only someone who truly sees you can be dangerous. You felt them. You understood the silences. You translated the withdrawal without needing it explained. And to someone whose deepest terror is being truly known and then left, someone who truly knows them and stays anyway, is the most destabilizing force imaginable. This is why the pull between these two types of people is not just chemistry, it is neurological. The avoidance system recognizes someone who can be close without demanding the kind of verbal emotional processing that their nervous system cannot handle. Someone who gives space instinctively because they read the signal. That feels safe. Safer than they have felt with most people. And safety for an avoidant is both the thing they want most and the thing they fear most. Because once they feel safe enough to relax, they are now exposed. And exposed means vulnerable. And vulnerable means the old wound is in range. So they create distance again. Not because they stopped feeling, because the feeling got too loud. And you, with your extraordinary attunement, felt the shift and moved toward it. Because that is what you do. You are a gap closer. You sense disconnection and your whole system mobilizes to repair it. So you close the gap. And they feel the pressure and create more distance. And you close that gap too, until you cannot anymore. Here is the part that nobody talks about slowly enough for it to actually land. There is a specific moment in this cycle, not a dramatic moment, not a screaming fight, not a final confrontation, that changes the entire dynamic permanently. It is the moment your pursuit stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like something you no longer have the energy to make. The longing does not disappear, not at first, but the compulsive urgency behind it does. Something in your body stops bracing for impact and just goes still. Therapists sometimes call this a threshold experience. The nervous system reaches the edge of what it can sustain, and it does something ancient and self-protective. It lets go. Not of the feeling, of the grip. And that moment, that almost invisible internal shift, registers in the relational field between you and an avoidant person like a seismic event. I want you to understand something before we go further, because the next part is going to sound like I am giving you a strategy. I am not. What I am describing is not a tactic. It is not a technique. It is what happens when a person who has given enormous emotional energy to a dynamic finally begins the process of genuinely reclaiming themselves. It is healing. It just happens to have a very specific effect on the avoidant nervous system as a byproduct. Here's what happens in the avoidance brain when your energy withdraws. First, something that looks like relief. The pressure they have been complaining about is gone. The closeness they found suffocating has pulled back. Their nervous system exhales. They might even feel a kind of vindication. See, I knew I needed space. This is better. And for a short window of time, they genuinely believe that. Do not be confused by this phase if you have seen it. It is real. But it is also the first of several stages in a process they cannot stop once it begins. Because underneath that relief, something else is activating. Something quiet and persistent that the relief cannot cover for long. Their system is running its unconscious scan. The scan it has been running the entire relationship without them being aware of it. And the scan is coming back with a result it has never returned before. The energy it was tracking is no longer registering. The pursuit signal is gone. And the nervous system, which was using that signal as a kind of background anchor, does not know what to do with its absence. This is not conscious. This is not them sitting down and thinking, I miss her. This is their body noticing that a familiar input has disappeared, the way your hand reaches for your phone and finds empty space. The noticing happens before the thought. The thought comes after. And when it comes, it arrives in fragments. A moment of wondering. A reach for the phone without quite knowing why. A passing thought that they push away because entertaining it would mean admitting something they are not ready to admit. What are they not ready to admit? This is the center of everything. What lives at the core of avoidant attachment, underneath the self-sufficiency and the need for space and the emotional distance, is one of the most painful beliefs a human being can carry through a lifetime. The belief that they are fundamentally too much and not enough at the same time. Too difficult to truly be with. Not worth the sustained effort of someone who sees them clearly. The walls were not built to keep people out. They were built to prevent the inevitable moment when someone who got close enough to really see them would eventually decide to leave anyway. If I leave first or make them leave, I am in control of the ending. I do not have to experience the thing I am most afraid of. I never have to find out if I am actually lovable. The person who stays and pursues, even while being pushed away, is actually, in a very perverse way, sustaining the avoidance, because the pursuit gives the avoidant permission to keep their walls up. The story they tell themselves is she only stays because she is attached to the idea of me. If I were truly present, if she really saw me, she would eventually go. So the withdrawal is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy management. Keep enough distance that the real test never happens. When you stop, when the pursuit ends. When the empath detaches genuinely, not as a move, not as a play, but as the natural result of someone who has finally hit their own limit, the story stops working. Because you are not leaving dramatically, you are not leaving wounded and crying and confirming the narrative that connection always ends in pain. You are simply living your life without them at the center of it. And from the avoidance perspective, this is the thing they cannot quite integrate. Because they cannot tell themselves the story they always used. They cannot say she left because I was not enough. They have to look at something harder. They are looking at someone who is deeply invested, deeply present, deeply committed to the connection, who just quietly stopped orienting toward them. And the question that rises out of that, the question that the avoidant nervous system cannot stop turning over, is not why did she leave? It is, was I worth staying for? Was I worth the version of her that was so present, so attuned, so willing to absorb the distance and still come back? Was there something real here that I kept at arm's length and am now watching walk away not in anger, but in peace? That question does not produce a clean answer. It produces grief, real grief, the kind that does not announce itself but shows up in ordinary moments. A song, a smell, a specific kind of late afternoon light. And the avoidant, who has spent decades building the infrastructure to avoid feeling this, now has no pursuit to push against, no pressure to retreat from, no dynamic to manage, just the silence. And what is in the silence is themselves. Some avoidants at this point reach out. They do it carefully, low-stakes contact, a meme they would have sent before, a reference to something only you would know. A casual message that is designed to test without revealing. And what they are testing is whether the signal comes back, whether the pull is still there, whether they can re-enter the orbit they spent so long resisting. If your detachment is genuine, if you have actually arrived at the place of stillness I described earlier, how you respond to that contact will feel different from how you would have responded before. Before, a single message from them would have sent a surge of hope through your system. You would have responded quickly, warmly, with more than the moment called for, because you were still oriented toward them. Now you might respond simply, or after a delay, or with genuine warmth but no urgency, no closing of the gap, no signal that the orbit has been re-established. And for the avoidant, who reads relational energy the same way you do, but from a much more defended position, that difference is enormous. That response, or the quality of it, tells them something they were not prepared to hear. That the version of you that pursued them has changed. That you are still there, but you are not coming toward them anymore. That they would have to come toward you. And here is the moment of maximum instability for the avoidant nervous system. Because coming toward someone, initiating, choosing closeness, choosing vulnerability, choosing to be the one who bridges the gap, is precisely the thing their entire psychological architecture was built to avoid. And the person they would be doing it for is no longer oriented toward them in the way that made it feel safe to refuse. The old dynamic required them to manage your approach. This new thing requires something completely different. It requires them to make a move without knowing how it will land, without knowing if the warmth they remember is still available, without the guarantee that the person they reach for will still be there in the way they were. That is exposure. Pure, unfiltered, unavoidable exposure. The thing the avoidant has been engineering their entire adult life to never feel. And they are feeling it now not because you did anything to hurt them, but because you stopped hurting yourself. Let that land. There are two paths forward from this point, and neither of them is yours to control. The first path is retreat. The avoidant goes deeper into independence. They tell themselves a story in which your detachment confirms what they believed. People leave. Connection is not reliable. The walls were right. This story is painful, but it is familiar. And familiar pain is always easier to manage than unfamiliar vulnerability. This path does not mean they do not feel the loss. It means they feel it in private and never let it change them. That is not your failure. That is their choice. The second path is the one that is harder and rarer and more real. The avoidant lets the loss mean something. They let the question of whether they were worth staying for become a genuine interrogation of how they have been living. They get uncomfortable enough to get honest enough to get curious enough to reach for something they have never reached for. Actual self-examination, support, a willingness to see the pattern they have been inside without knowing it. Some of them reach back toward you from this place. Not from panic, not from the automated re-engagement that is just the old cycle restarting. From something quieter and more uncertain and more real. A genuine question about whether it is too late. Whether you respond to that, how you respond to that, what you require before you consider it, that is entirely yours to decide. And the version of you that has gone through this whole arc, who has felt the exhaustion and the grief and the stillness and the slow, quiet return to yourself, that version of you makes that decision from a fundamentally different place than the version who is inside the cycle. You are no longer deciding from longing. You are no longer deciding from the hope that this time will be different, because you can feel how much potential is there. You are deciding from evidence, from pattern, from a clear-eyed read of whether what you are being offered is actually different or just the same dynamic wearing new clothes. Here is what you have actually learned through all of this. You have learned something about yourself that is worth more than any relationship outcome. You have learned that your ability to feel deeply, to attune powerfully, to sustain connection through enormous difficulty is not a liability. It is an extraordinary capacity. And like any extraordinary capacity, it has been largely wasted when it is offered without reciprocity. The version of you that existed inside that dynamic was pouring from an ocean into a cup that kept tipping over. You never ran out of water, but you spent so much energy filling that cup that you stopped noticing what you were pouring into yourself. The detachment, however painful its path, is the moment you turn back toward your own ocean. You remember that you are the source, not a resource, the source. And sources do not chase. Sources do not close every gap. Sources simply exist and allow others to find their way to them or not. The person you are on the other side of this is more grounded, more discerning, and paradoxically, more magnetic than the person who was inside the cycle. Not because you became colder, but because you became complete. And completion, wholeness, the quality of someone who is genuinely okay in their own presence is one of the rarest things one person can offer another. Most people are searching for someone to fill something. You have stopped searching that way. You are now someone who can offer something from fullness. That changes everything about who is drawn to you and why. I want to close with the thing I most want you to hold on to. The moment the avoidant loses control in this dynamic is not when you give more. It is not when you try harder. It is not when you find the perfect words or the perfect distance or the perfect strategy. It is the moment you stop being willing to lose yourself in the process of trying to reach them. It is the moment you choose yourself. Not as a tactic, not as a test, as a genuine act of self-recognition. That is the moment. That is the thing that shifts the ground beneath the entire dynamic. And whatever happens after that moment, whether they grow or retreat, whether they reach back or disappear, whether the story has a second chapter or closes quietly, you will not be the same person who walked into that cycle. You will know something you cannot unknow. You will have felt your own ground again, and once you feel it, you do not forget it. You do not trade it. You do not give it away for someone who is never willing to meet you on it. That is not losing. That is the most important thing you will ever find.